We have a awesome guest today in Richard Socher. He is the CEO of U.com. He created this thing that everybody on my timeline on LinkedIn is talking about these days. Every time somebody's like, Connor, you have to be using U.com. And so we begged Richard, like, Richard, can't you make the time? Come on. So he found time in his schedule. Really appreciate it. The guy is, as Jaden had just said, a legend. Richard, welcome. Do you want to just kind of like walk us through a little bit about like just how you got here,
Happy
man?
to,
Because you are
yeah.
in
Hey,
a really
everyone.
exciting
Great to
space.
be here. I did my PhD at Stanford. I had this crazy idea in 2010 to use neural networks for natural language processing. It was a very controversial idea at the time, but turned out to kind of be the right one. And so started after my PhD teaching the first worldwide first class on neural nets for NLP. Started a company called MetaMind that basically made it very easy to train neural nets for other companies because this was like pre-TensorFlow, pre-PyTorch, and so on. We got acquired by Salesforce. I became chief scientist there and eventually executive vice president running most of the AI efforts. Had a phenomenal time there. We did a lot of interesting work. We invented prompt engineering in 2018. Paper famously rejected by reviewers publicly, but cited by folks like OpenAI that inspired them to say, hey, you can build a single model for all of NLP. And instead of having one sentiment analysis model and one translation model, you just ask the model, what's the sentiment of this paragraph? What's the translation of that sentence into German? And so that kind of started this idea that I had been dreaming about for over a decade, which is to have one model eventually, not just for all of language, but for all of AI. And so that's kind of been intellectually what I've been up to. And then in 2020, I thought, well, clearly, if you can have this amazing new capability of natural language understanding and processing, the biggest application of all of that is search. So we should work and build a new kind of search engine. Actually, our official name is Suzy for summary search, because we wanted to, instead of giving you 10 blue links, give you real answers, amazing answers. And that led us, we tried a bunch of things until ChatGPT came out. A lot of users told us like, oh, I'm so used to Google. Don't make it too different. But once ChatGPT came out, everyone's like, oh, actually, like I could see a different world. So we're the first search engine to really combine a search index with a large language model at the end of 2022. That idea obviously got copied many times by now, but we are still ahead. And we actually just did a big benchmark study where we compared a ChatGPT Pro and other smaller competitors. And it turns out users prefer our answers. They're more accurate, they're more helpful, and so on across a bunch of different axes. And so we're super excited. We're opening up APIs now too. And that's U.com and me in a nutshell.
That's amazing. Okay, first off, I know Connor's got a million questions, but I just got to get into this one first because I'm super excited. Being someone that is, I have a software company, AI Box, that is building in this space, and we use APIs for a lot of these different things. We let people mix them together. So I just got to say, I'm super excited for the U.com API to come out. And I think I speak for a lot of people that say that. When is that? When can people expect that?
So it is already out. You can go to api.u.com and start playing around with it. What the API does not yet have is full feature parity with the actual end user consumer experience. So having amazing citations right within the answers, having the different modes also available as APIs, because especially our research mode is essentially the least hallucinating and pretty much hallucination free way of getting an answer. It writes almost perfect, like Wikipedia articles, personalized for you in that moment, with images and graphs and everything. Genius Mode will write Python code for you and then execute that code, and then give you like accurate, mathematically, accurate answers. So all of these things, they're coming in the next few weeks live into the API. But already you can get a search backend that is more accurate than Google or Bing because it has many more and longer snippets for your LLMs. And then you can get a full RAG retrieval augmented generation answers on the API. But in about 2 weeks, you will have those answers also with citations.
Amazing.
That's Yeah, that's super cool. It's I was yeah, and when I look at it, I mean, obviously like there's everybody kind of has their own model and way of doing things. Walk us through those different sort of like parts for you, like the Genius, like like you have sort of a paid version of this, everything else. Like what do users get? And by the way, this is not, I mean, I should say at the outset, like this is not a commercial. This is just like, tell me more about it. Wait, did you say you get 2 for 1? Like, I don't mean that. I just like, just walk us through like the model and how you decided to set it up, because the
Yeah, for
user
sure.
interface
And this
for
is
folks
actually
is
something
so
we've
important.
iterated quite a long time on. I'm super excited about our new designers and product head of product. So here's an example. And for those who only listen, you can go to u.com and ask this kind of question. The question here is explain the background, action, and consequences of the Peloponnesian War. And what it will do is essentially write this entire beautiful Wikipedia article-like answer in research mode. And you can basically look at every single one of these facts, and you can see each one has 1 or 2 citations, and you get all of the footnotes. And so by the end of it, you can actually see like, oh, did this article, like did this war, this battle happen really in 4 or 5 BC? You click on the citation, and it will not just go to the website and say, oh, somewhere on this website it was mentioned, but actually scroll down and mark exactly where it found that fact. Here, finally in 405, Spartan Admiral Lysander crushed the Athenian fleet, blah, blah. Like, and so this, like, no one else does that right now. Now, Genius mode is for when you want to have mathematical, complex reasoning questions. Imagine you have a math or physics problem, you're a researcher or a student, and here's this idea of like a Ferris wheel. It spins around, it has a certain diameter, it's a certain, center off the ground, and then you're supposed to sketch a graph to show the height of that as the passenger varies over time. It will translate your natural language question. It'll learn like, well, I'm supposed to sketch a graph. Here's a lot of math in there. It'll learn. It realizes after thinking a little bit about it, I should probably program here. Then it programs, like translates that natural language description into Python code, and then it'll run that Python code and then give you that perfect plot of an answer. And if you still don't understand it, you can say, oh, please explain why this graph looks like that. And it'll walk you through sort of why it did this coding, how it made the code. And that is what Genius mode is for you. And, it'll can also combine facts from the internet. They can say, find the population of India and US, and then plot their population, assuming this growth rate. And again, it will find facts online, write the code, and then produce a plot for you. And this works for all kinds of things like complex, like healthcare questions, where citations are even more important. You want to know where the facts come from. If you compare this to something like ChatGPT, the Ferris wheel question here, you just get some kind of very wrong Christmas tree looking graph. And then even for the Peloponnesian War question, like you get some of the same answers, but you have no idea of verifying them. You don't get many citations. You don't know where it comes from. And there are often like hallucinations in that. So that's kind of the main idea of these modes. And then of course, smart mode is kind of where you can just replace your Google experience, or it's just like a quick, factual answers with citations, with images and stuff like that. But it's not as comprehensive.
This is honestly, this is so amazing. These examples you've shared are really, really impressive. I think the thing that I love the most is like getting your response as a list with footnotes that you can go click, verify. It goes straight to the point. Like this is 1 million times better than essentially the Google search experience of searching, scrolling through a billion links, trying to do all the research yourself. Like essentially you are the LLM that has to combine all the data, figure out all the points. This just gives you it all in one. My question for you, Richard, that I'm really curious on, because I think this is an incredible product. What do you think? It just feels like companies like UAI, and there's a couple other in different verticals in AI that are doing really impressive things. It seems like you guys are miles ahead. Why do you think companies like Google, for example, and there's a handful of others, I feel like I've been kind of waiting for them to come out with some like amazing new features or things, and I feel like they just really have dropped the ball over the last year, honestly. And Connor and I have both talked about this a lot, whether it's their AI products, it's just a lot of different things, and we're just left feeling like unimpressed. Then we look at something like this on UAI and we're like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. What do you think? Why do you guys have such a solid competitive advantage here?
Yeah, I think I think it's complicated and depends on who you look at in the competition. For us, it's focused on just amazing answers, right? We don't have to save $500 million of search ad revenue a day, right? Like when you're making this much money, $500 million a day on search ad revenue, you just don't want to change the world that much. You want the world to ideally just stay like that. I mean, they make so much money. They didn't know what to do with it. They built self-driving car, internet balloons, like full proteins. Like they don't know what to do with all this money, but it's nice to have it. So you don't want to lose that. So it's a classic innovator's dilemma for Google on a corporate side. And even if they have the technology, which they claim they've had for a very long time, they just don't want the world to change too much because they're making so much money. And when you actually double click into the search space for a while, you realize that when you have such a monopoly, new things happen. You can change the user experience and make it ever so slightly worse without people noticing too much because they don't know that there's any other alternative out there, right? And Google pays Apple $15 billion a year to be the default, right? And then make it quite hard for people to change that, though that is also changing now in the European Union and maybe in the US in the future. But basically, what Google has learned is that the worse they make the organic links and the more relevant the ad links are on top of the results, the more you click even more on ads, they make even more money, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so when there's no competition, that you can get away with doing that for years.
Oh yeah, and I have to say, like, as a user, I have directly experienced this. It frustrates me because I went through whole phases of my life where I'm like, I refuse to click on any Google ads because also being on the business side, I'm just like, I hate how much it costs. I'm just never going to click on a Google ad. But then at the same time, I literally have seen what you've said where it's like, I search for something, the results are kind of terrible, but the ads are good. And I can tell the ad is like literally the exact thing I need. And I'm like, I want to click on this. But like, where do I find this in the real search results? And I think I never actually pinpointed that until you just said it today, which is that, yeah, they're financially incentivized for those to be hyper specific, but then for the ones below to be not. So here's the one thing that I think, Richard, you and everyone at UAI, or at u.com really has going for you is that I feel like I felt the same way with like electric cars, where there was a lot of, let's just say, like old school regular car companies that over the years purchased patents, purchased electric car companies, and it felt like they were kind of stifling the innovation there. They didn't want to change the model. You had Tesla come around, prove it was possible, got a lot of people on board, and now you have all the old school car companies being like, oh, look, no, we can do electric cars too. Personally, like, I feel like very conflicted on this, and I'm like, I don't want to support any of the companies that like had these kind of like, the Volkswagen scandals or with Dieselgate and stuff. Like, I don't want to support the companies doing, because like, I'm like, your track record isn't good and you're just doing it because someone else, it feels like, is beating you. And I think you guys are going to benefit a lot from this. Making these incredible search results, your number one priority is just to make the best search results. And so even if Google and Bing and everyone else just decides, oh my gosh, we're going to completely change and just clone and copy like u.com exactly, it's like, look, guys, like, you missed the wave. And so I think there's probably a lot of consumers that feel that. And of course, you guys are going to continue innovating, so you'll be miles ahead by the time it happens. But I think that's something that you'll benefit from a lot for sure.
I think that makes sense. And yeah, you're right. We're like, we continue to like innovate and build new things. I'm super excited for the stuff that's coming out in the next few weeks and months. And also the partnerships. We already have several of the top Gen AI companies like Deep AI and so on using our APIs for some of their answers. And we're excited to expand that because it's kind of how, and this is a weird thing for startups, because generally for startups, it's a bad idea to do B2C and B2B at the same time. But somehow every successful company in our space ends up kind of doing that, right? You have the OpenAI, Anthropic, they have a consumer experience, but they also have APIs to help others kind of benefit from that technology.
Yeah, it's such a great conversation, and I was thinking the same thing about the innovator's dilemma. And Jaden and I have talked about it at length with Google, like, because there's no reasonable reason why they shouldn't be so far ahead of everyone. And then you see companies, like the smaller ones, but because we're talking to you, sort of, like a u.com that, I mean, clearly has a much smaller team. I assume you haven't cracked the 200,000 person team yet, but it's any day now. But it's funny what you say about sort of like, and again, it's more than just the innovator's dilemma. It's like, what are their other competing interests? And I find this. So I go out and I train a lot of companies on generative AI, and the one industry that I've never been able to crack into is legal. And I'm like, legal is like so prime for disruption, but it almost feels like, and sorry to all my lawyer friends out there, but there's like this agreement of like, nobody uses this because it's going to absolutely crush the billable hour and crush their entire business model. I don't think they're ready for that. And I think that you're right, sort of to get in on this space. So I have a lot of questions, but just maybe staying there for a second. You decide to go into this space like search. I mean, search is dominated. Like, I mean, so is this kind of like part of your personality, or you just see like, what, we have a good product. Now, by the way, this is playing out because, again, people love your product, but I mean, what's that like to go up against that, and why search? And did you ever even consider sort of like doing something a little more niche or weird or something like that?
It
Or how
is
did you think
generally
about
a
that?
bad idea to build something that complicated with such a dominant player. And I would discourage most startup founders from doing that. I did my first company, right? It was a solid B2B enterprise play.
Right.
We built useful technology. We had an amazing exit, and and folks were happy. So that is part of it. I personally am very driven by impact, and I thought for a long time in the 2010 2020, like that decade, the biggest impact I could have with the skills I have and the kind of work that I enjoyed doing is on the research side, because NLP AI didn't work. But now I actually feel like, okay, AI does work pretty well. And then I thought about, okay, what's the biggest impact I could currently have with this? And I do think actually that we're entering a new step function of human productivity with AI. When you look at the past, when that happened, it changed the whole human condition. When 90% of people work in agriculture like 150 years ago, most people think about that. They don't have a lot of free time to think about more interesting scientific advances and so on, maybe even politics, right? They're just like trying to put food on the table. Now that we can automate that, we are becoming a more interesting species. And I think that will be true again with AI. And it often starts with the right answers to complex questions. And so that to me was just the biggest impact thing. And then I'm very much a top-down thinker. I'm just like, I sort of bite hard into the top problem, and then I just keep trying to work on figuring it out. And sometimes it takes time, right? Like when I try to convince the NLP community to use neural nets, a lot of papers got rejected. A lot of people are like, why are you doing this? This is the stuff that didn't work in the 80s. Like, it makes no sense to think of words as vectors and lists of numbers instead of discrete entities and all of these things. And so, but sometimes when you're so motivated about the end solution, the sort of problem that you're trying to solve, it's okay to go through long periods of confusion or people rejecting your idea and thinking that doesn't make sense. Now, of course, it is changing. Now there's actually more and more competition. So I moved away from the space of like, no one cares, no one thinks it's the right thing, to like, oh my God, everyone's copying it. Like, we have a feature, and like 3 to 9 months later, like that feature has like 50 copycats. So it's a different world that I'm still in some ways adjusting to.
That's amazing. Okay, so one thing that Connor and I both love to ask people about, especially when we have someone like yourself, who it feels like you kind of have a very unique perspective on what's going on in the market, and I think specifically yours. I would love to ask you, what are some of your predictions about the future of AI in search? Because I think this is a huge shift, right? Like you mentioned, we have Google, who's kind of been this monopoly for a long time, who's kind of dominated the space for a long time, billions of dollars. But it truly feels like we're making shifts. I've talked to Connor before. We are both completely changing our search habits. I'm pretty sure Connor hasn't used Google since all these AI tools came out. Connor hasn't used Google in like a year. So like, tell us a little bit about where you kind of see this going and some of your predictions for AI in search.
Yeah, I wish I'm kind of German still, in the sense that I'm not as strong and boisterous in the marketing department, and I much rather under promise and over deliver. So I wish I could tell you we're going to be the next dominant $1 trillion search chat monopoly, but I do think actually that might never be possible again. I think like when 20 years ago, when Google came out, you would compare Google Answer to any other search engine at the time, and it was just a night and day difference. They just had a quality that no one else had based on their technology. but we just did this big benchmarking study where we compared our answers, and I gave you a few examples where that kind of is like visceral and obvious. But share my screen here for a second and show you. We asked users, hey, how often do you prefer our paid mode answers versus ChatGPT paid, our smart mode free answers versus like Perplexity and ChatGPT free, and so on, and all the paid versions. And like basically we like asked them a bunch of questions, and it ended up being such that we are actually more comprehensive, more accurate, more faithful, not always more concise, but similar in clarity to than ChatGPT 4+. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that at least there are at least two players that have really high quality, right? And so it's hard for one player to just dominate the space so much and build this massive monopoly, because like other folks are able to have even better quality. Now, we're still smaller than ChatGPT by a large margin, and so it's hard for them to be able to build that massive monopoly. So long story short, I think we'll, instead of one or two like $1 trillion companies, we are going to see maybe half a dozen or a dozen like $100 billion types of companies that will start to take away more and more of what we used to traditionally call search engine. We're actually now calling it AI assistants. Because the truth is, when people think of search outside of the tech bubble, they think of search, they're like, okay, it's Google, it's temple links, and I'm never going to change it. I don't even know. I think it's just a default thing in my browser. Like some people mix up what a browser and a search engine is, right? And so, but when you say AI assistant, they're like, okay, that's usually $20 a month. Like that's more useful. Now it can look different and have different feelings and experiences and so on in the user and for the users. And so that is where I think the future is going. I think we are both expanding and chopping up the market. Like, because you wouldn't ask Google these questions I just gave you, like explain the action consequences and conclusion of the Peloponnesian War, or solve this math problem for me, because Google wouldn't actually write code and solve a math problem for you. So you're expanding the space of queries, and then you're also taking away some of the queries that you would have traditionally done on Google. And we're doing more and more of that. Like if you ask for stock price, we don't give you a huge paragraph of about the stock price. We just show you a stock ticker. We ask about the weather, we show you weather. So like we're having we're adding all these snippets and widgets or apps into the chat responses, so that you don't have to eventually go to Google at all anymore. But just to like level set expectations, even Yahoo still has like 900 million monthly active users. So like these big companies don't go away overnight.
Okay.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's let me just kind of click on that for a second, because it's what you said there is really, first of all, I love that you're like, I'm not a marketer. Like it's just, you're right. I mean, it's one of these things where you have, this is why we have teams, I guess. But just on that point, so again, so I get to talk to like thousands of people over the year, big keynotes, things, just all this kind of stuff, and I find that just tons and tons of people, even though the statistics show that people have used these things like a ChatGPT, people haven't. They kind of tried it once, and so they say they've used it, right? So, and when people aren't using it consistently, clearly they're not using it, and I think that especially the three of us really live in this bubble, right? You kind of referenced it. So my question on that is, it's not even just marketing. It feels like you're trying to figure out what even people want, because I don't even think people know what they want yet, which is really interesting, right? So it's sort of one of these things where, when I'm demonstrating what generative AI is, when I show people, it's like I'm doing black magic on stage, right? I mean, people just cannot believe it. And so for you guys, it almost feels like there's two things going on here, right? Like you're getting your name out, and people who love you guys clearly love you guys. You have great product, everything like that. But how do you think about marketing it? Is it sort of the the user interface? Is it the because obviously you probably, like, what I was really impressed with you.com was the first thing I noticed about it was just the speed. Do you know what I mean? Like I was like, wow, that's really fast. And so that already people are like, wow, it's really quick, because sometimes it's harder if you're on a search engine of any kind. Almost by definition, you're probably not validating the results. So it's a little harder to do that. So when you're thinking about what people want, right? You are ultimately a company, accuracy, speed, efficiency is maybe more important for developers, everything like that. But how do you even think about what people want and giving them something that they don't even know they want yet?
So, we hired a new chief marketing officer who's working on those very things. And we're educating. I think there's a big part of marketing is just educating the people outside of the Twitter, tech, Silicon Valley bubble about that this thing is possible. And we're seeing a lot of interest from students. Students have like strong knowledge problems. The truth is also that there are some internet users, all they want to use a search engine for in their lives is just a like way to go to Ford 150 carburetor replacement part like site, right? And if you're just using it for navigation, then you probably don't need a different experience, right? It's the people who actually seek out knowledge on a continuing basis, which is developers, students, knowledge workers, like consultants. They really benefit, like they become much more productive. But for people who just use Google like a yellow pages thing, and they just, almost just type in, in my user studies, a couple of years ago, I watched this user use us, and I'm like, okay, how do you use Google? And really, like, she just wanted to go to facebook.com. But what she did is she typed in google.com in the browser bar, then typed in facebook.com into the Google search bar, and then clicked on facebook.com on Google. That's how she thought you would navigate the internet, right? And so when I saw that, I was like, okay, it's going to take a long time to get to those users. And honestly, sometimes some of these users you will only get to if you're a default, or make it a very easy way to choose the default. And so I do actually generally not a big fan of like over-regulating, especially novel areas, but the EU did do us a major favor, and I think they're the consumers to enforcing Apple and Google in the EU to have a choice screen that pops up and say, hey, you can choose your search engine, because most people aren't even aware that that's a possibility. So that, there's like the early adopters, the, later early adopters, and then there's the very late adopters. And some of those, like, it'll be hard to get to without major changes in our ecosystem.
I just made a huge realization when you were talking about this, and I was kind of thinking about the way that we use these tools. I've had the conversation with people before where I'm like, oh yeah, like there's this, ChatGPT, or there's u.com, or, there's these tools, and it's $20 a month and you get all these things. And I've heard people be like, oh, but like, why? It's just like, why does it cost any money? Like, I just want to use a free Google or whatever. It's just occurred to me that we're going to look back in the coming years on what we currently have on the current like search monopoly situation as like Google is going to feel like this very old, spammy, addy kind of like a covered space. And it's going to be like, you're going to have maybe, yes, you'll have like definitely free tiers of there, but it just kind of makes me think of like Spotify's free tier. Like I hate going on there and having to listen to like 2 minutes of like ads. I have YouTube Premium, and whenever I'm not logged into that YouTube Premium account, and like I'm on a different account and all these ads pop up, I just like forget what that experience is like. And I'm like, this is so terrible. That's literally what Google is. And so, yeah, I think we'll look back, and as we start using these tools more and more, it's like, this is like the premium experience of, you're not worried about like your results having some sort of ulterior motive. No one's like paying to actually get in front of you with the worst product. And anyway, so I think overall for the consumer, this is so much better of a product. One thing that I'd love to ask you about, Richard, is what are some common misconceptions that people have about this area? Some things that people are getting wrong, perhaps, that you can dispel some myths for us in this field.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll have to think about that a little bit. I mean, at a very high level, people think that I guess there are different kinds of people have different kinds of misconceptions. I think some high-level users think there's like AI is a hype bubble, right? So that's a huge misconception. AI is here, obviously, to stay. Maybe you won't be able to raise like $100 million in a seed round to build an open source model with unclear monetization in a couple of years, but like AI companies will stay for a very long time. I'm an investor in a lot of companies. I've been very fortunate. The Hugging Face founders took my class. I invested in their first round at a $5 million valuation, and so I think there's just an amazing amount of impact that AI has, and that will never go just disappear, right? I think at some point it may almost disappear in the sense that it's so ubiquitous that people just don't even call it AI anymore. It's just like, oh, it's my assistant. Like, of course, my assistant is digital. I can't afford it like human assistant or something like that, right? But so I think that's one misconception from some users. And then on the really technical users, some have a misconception of like, oh, u.com, it's just like Google plus ChatGPT wrapper, right? But then it's like, there's so much more complexity to make it and give millions of answers a day, where, you know, you say something personal, SmartLearn will pop in and say like, oh, it says you love hiking and you have 2 kids. Like, I'm going to save that. And then 3 months later, if you ask, oh, what should I do in Hawaii? Like, they'll be like, hey, you mentioned you like hiking before, so here are some good hiking trails and stuff like that. And then there's like knowing when to actually search the web. Searching the web, you know, it's like a little bit extra cost. And if someone asks for a poem, you don't want to like search the web and give a citation for each line of the poem to their wife or something. It makes no sense. And so they're just so much. The citation logic itself is also actually quite complicated. Like how to cite the fact. Like we actually did a study. You know, we're a lot of scientists, and so we looked at some of our competitors who were like able to like really quickly add citations to sentences, and we're like, wow, it's like milliseconds faster than we are. And then we did an accuracy study. Like you actually look at how often, when there's a sentence and there's a citation behind it, how often is that fact actually mentioned in that cited link? And it turns out for some of our competitors, it's like 50% only. So they add half the time, they just add random citation links behind random sentences, hoping users don't find out. But we think that really undermines the whole space. So there's just a ton of complexity. And maybe that is one misconception of like, oh, this shouldn't be that hard. Everything gets really, really hard at scale and at higher accuracies.
It's Richard, this has been absolutely awesome. I know we're just about at time. I want to kind of give you the last word before Jaden closes us out. When you're like waking up in the middle of the night, or when you get like really, really excited, whatever that looks like in your world, like what is it that you're excited about that u.com is like it's coming next, or whatever that you're like, this is the thing that's going to be so awesome?
One is, I think u.com will be maybe by next month even much more about you. Like it will be much more visceral and close to like, wow, this is for me, by me, this is who I am about. And so I'll leave it at that one. And then even further out, I think eventually AI assistants will do things for you, right? It will not just be sequences of words that these sequence models, neural network sequence models like large language models learn, but it will be sequences of actions. And at some point, you expect your AI assistant to just get things done rather than just tell you the right answers and where to do those things.
I love that. Well, I definitely want to get you back on the podcast as some of these exciting announcements are coming back or coming down the pipe to talk about them, announce them. Richard, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. To the listener, thank you so much for tuning in to the podcast. We'll leave links in the show notes to u.com. Where you can learn more about and try out the platform. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure to leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, and we hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day.
Thanks, Jaden. Thanks, Connor.